Okay, hi everyone. It is July the 5th, the day after the supposed Independence Day in the United States, whatever that day really means. Um, yeah, I don't often come and talk about historical stuff, but I wanted to bring up a piece of information on the World Fairs that I know a lot of people who have been with my channel for a long time were, appreciative of the work I did in my book exposing the expositions and so I came across something that I think is very important, and I want to give credit to the person who came up with the discovery. And it's really, really important discovery about the World Fairs. It's from a documentary that came out earlier in the year. I believe it's called Old World Order. Um, Stu Peters, I think, is the person who put it together. And at first, when it came out, when somebody emailed me the information and kind of said, "Hey, did you see this documentary?" I was like kind of surprised because I was never asked to be a part of it. I wrote a book on the World Fairs, and they're talking a lot about the World Fairs, and I thought it was a bit odd. Granted, lots of things are now odd when you go into these areas, so things don't surprise me. And at first, I was, okay. It kind of surprised me, and then it's no big deal. It's whatever. They don't want my opinion. They don't want my opinion. But within the documentary, a lot of what's in there is, I would call it, pretty standard information. But there was one piece of information that I'm sharing. It comes from around the 25-minute mark, if you have access to the video. About 25 minutes to 28 minutes. Now, the person who is presenting the information, I can't find, because they put the name up of the people that they did interview for this documentary when they first came up, and I'm not exactly I can't 100% verify, but I think the person was smart enough. I think it's My Lunch Break, the channel, the YouTube channel here called My Lunch Break, because he was smart enough to wear a My Lunch Break T-shirt. So I'm going to assume 99% that that's where the credit should go for this small interview that happened in the documentary. If I'm incorrect, please. Somebody can fill me in on who is the person who does get the credit, because that's an important part of this research. Is to give credit to. Okay, fine. A lot of people my book is never talked about anymore. No one ever discusses it. And part of the reason for writing the book was not so much to get credit necessarily. It was, of course, to do exactly what hopefully it's done, which is inspired other people to go and look into these expositions and go deeper than I did. It's just nice sometimes when people actually, acknowledge it. Anyway, point being, what My Lunch Break, and I'm assuming that's who it is, so I'm going to call him that by the rest of this video, uncovered something in a series of interviews that he did, and I'm assuming through his own research, obviously before that there are underground tunnels beneath at least certainly some of the key remaining buildings in Chicago. And interestingly, it's something I never came across in the research I was doing when I wrote the book. There's, of course, nothing like that listed in any of the original documents about the fair. So nothing in the original early books of plate books or the detailed historical books that came out after each of these fairs happened, because I've read a ton of them. Nothing ever mentioned anything below ground. And I never pieced together like, hey, maybe I should look, maybe I should think about that. And so that particular piece of the documentary where he winds up interviewing a security guard, the picture, by the way, up is where they're talking. I think they're talking to the security guard at the at what was the old Field Museum. Now, however, I'm a little confused as to which building they are actually discussing here. Is it the building that's been shown up to this point? Now, that's the Palace of Fine Arts. That was an original building from the 1893 Chicago Exposition, and it's currently now the Museum of Science and Technology, I think is what it's called. But right after the World Fair, which again there was also something Matthew, I think, was talking, and just before that was saying that this was a structure built out of temporary materials, and they decided to build it, and they decided to add concrete and whatever and make to it later. But the story, the standard story, and I like, Matthew, great guy, by the way. I hope he's doing well. He went through some surgery a few months ago. I did an interview with him a while back, and I heard from him after the surgery that he seemed to be doing okay, and I haven't heard any information since. So, if you're listening, I hope you're doing fine. Just minor correction. Like your material, like your research. Great guy. He said that the building was temporary and then was added to later, and that's many of the buildings. Something like that's the story of the one in San Francisco. But the Field Museum was supposed to have been built from granite from scratch, or what was called the Palace of Fine Arts at the time, was built from scratch. Supposedly, right? The only real permanent building that was supposed to have been built at the Chicago Exposition because it was housing so much of the world's precious artwork that it needed to be fireproof. That's the story. All the other expensive technology and artwork and everything else and all the other buildings, that's not important, but just the one building, of course. So the what's known as the Field Museum, or what was known now as the Museum of Science and Technology, used to be the Palace of Fine Arts. As soon as the exposition ended, that became what's known as the Field Museum, which is a really interesting museum. It's got artifacts from stuff all over the world that was combination of came to the fair and didn't go back, that they put into a museum, and it was housed there until 1921. Then the Field Museum moved to a different building. And this is really important. It moved to a different building that's supposed to have been built in 1921, and bizarrely, the architect for this building is claimed to be Daniel Burnham, the famed guy who was totally involved in all the building of Chicago and the World Fair, but he was dead by 1912, yet the Chicago Field Museum was built in 1921, the current Field Museum. Now it's known as the Museum of Natural History, right? And so it was built in 1921, but Burnham is still listed as one of the architects. Graham Anderson, I think, is now listed as the official architect. So anyway, confusing. So I think in the interview that My Lunch Break is doing, I think they're interviewing the guards and the janitors of the current Field Museum, the current Museum of Natural History, which was not a building at the original World's Fair. So I'm just trying to make sure that we're clear on these subjects. That I want to make sure that I'm presenting this as accurately as I can gauge from the material. Now, of course, if My Lunch Break hears this and he wants to come over and put some stuff in the comments that can indicate exactly what the interview was, what he's found, what the underground stuff was, I mean, that would be fantastic. But so anyway, the point, 10 minutes, and we're finally getting to it. These security guards / janitors confirm that there are underground tunnels, which often fill with water, I guess, that they have to pump out, that generally they're not allowed to go down into for any reason, underneath the structures, and that these tunnels run long distances and connect various buildings underneath the city of Chicago. Now, you obviously only are building underground tunnel systems, at the time of the building, if one, the buildings are going to be permanent, and two, they have pretty huge functions if you need to also have massive quarrying and building techniques under the ground to facilitate whatever you're going to do with an underground, equivalent of underground stuff. Now, most cities, if you go if you go looking into it, all have giant underground tunnel systems that run all through it. I bumped into that when I was living near Oslo in Norway, and I was surprised when I realized the extent of the underground. Like, there's basically an underground city underneath the city of Oslo, and those tunnels run. I've been told some of them run all the way, like a long distance down to like Drobak and a few places in the south. And it's a massive underground. And so every city in the world is these underground tunnels. So the question becomes, okay, were the tunnels built whenever the buildings that we currently, or the original old buildings were built, were they built simultaneously? Or is the underground tunnels even older than the city itself? That's the first question. But we know, okay, so now he's confirmed they exist in that, at least at that particular current building in Chicago. It's not a World Fair building. Right, the building. I think they're being interviewed. They're interviewing the people at are from 1921. Now, if they're really from the Museum of Science and Technology, then it's not the Field Museum. It was the old Field Museum, and it was the Palace of Fine Arts. I don't think it's the same building. The problem is they show a picture of the Palace of Fine Arts. They seem to talk about that building, and then they interview these guys who I think are from the different. But the point being is, okay, so for the Palace of Fine Arts in Chicago, the supposed building that is still standing from the World Fair, does it have tunnels underneath it? That is the question. And this would be the same for any other surviving World Fair building, right? There's a World Fair building surviving from Buffalo. There's one in St. Louis. There's one in San Francisco. All of these cities after the World Fair always left one beautiful building that became a museum, art gallery, whatever. There's the question is, do you live in Buffalo? Do you live in St. Louis? Go down there like tomorrow, literally Monday morning, go down and ask some people, hey, do you have an underground structure beneath this? Is there tunnels underneath this? Because if there are, if they tell you, yes, there's actually underground tunnel system beneath this building, it's, we have it closed off, nobody goes down there, but it does exist, then the indication is a massive building project. You don't build temporary structures and at the same time build an underground tunnel system beneath it. That would just be stupid, right? Building pyramids at Giza or Dashur or whatever, that's hard enough. And as soon as you start having to build internal structures into the rock that you're actually laying, and at the same time, of course, in the Egyptian work was actually then building the interior structures with finely polished granite rooms. I mean, the work that adds to the project is magnified. The work of building tunnels underneath World Fair structures is magnified, absolutely magnified. So to me, that little piece, that little 2 or 3 minutes of that old world documentary, Old World Order, I'll say it correctly, is so important. It's so important because it's indicating, right? It's indicating that there's no possible. There's only two theories. A, the tunnels were there before they even built anything, which means, well, it's highly likely if you've got tunnels, you've got buildings on top of them. So there's proof right there. The buildings are older than they say. Or at the very least, if they say that they're building structures in 1891, and you're building a tunnel system underground with it, which is huge work, particularly when you have no machines, supposedly, right? When you're doing things with dynamite and pickaxes, that's a massive amount of work. And you need when you've already got 7,000 acres, you have to build, or 700 acres you have to build, on top of the ground, and you're going to build another 700 acres below ground? Like, no, that's an absolute waste of energy. Unless there's obvious, then the buildings are meant to be long-term structures, and there's something it indicates that the buildings, you wouldn't build the tunnels unless you're building the buildings to last. And they obviously were not building granite structures other than, to last with the tunnel system. So to me, it's a huge reveal as to showing that the World Fair buildings have to be very, very old. The site has to be old. And that'd be another thing to look at a place like Jackson Park in Chicago, where the World Fair was. And that would be, is there any way to figure out if you've got a tunnel system beneath Jackson Park? I found that out in the I call it the Naked Statue Park. It's the very strange, very demonic park in downtown Oslo. It's I can never name Vigeland Park or something, I think it's called, based on these weird sculptures it's weird. And it was when I was there with somebody that I know who knows the area really, really well that told me, oh, yeah, that's the door that gets you in. It's like it's mound and there's a door, a hidden door on the back of it almost. It's like you have to like walk to the end of the park to even see it. There's a huge door. Oh, yeah. I don't mean like a door like for a person. I mean like a kind of door where you could drive like, 18-wheeler trucks into it. Oh, yeah, that's the door that gets you into the tunnel system. And then the highway underneath here goes from here and moves around all over the place. That's how you can access the tunnels. And I've had a couple of other people who used to live in downtown who accidentally made a discovery in their apartment basement one time. They were like, there was this door that was like always like seemed to be sealed shut. And one day it was open and they just like, well, what's in here? And they just walked in and like, holy fuck, it's a tunnel system. So we have these tunnel systems everywhere in all the major cities. And they there's never a good explanation. But it's important when it's linked to anything with the World Fair, because at least you can say, well, New York, they were building New York to last. They're building the skyscrapers, and yeah, okay, so they built the tunnel system with the sky. You can try to at least give an explanation. When you're building a supposedly temporary, even though massive site, that you're saying, we're just going to build it and we're going to blow it up as soon as this is done. That's the plan. We're going to burn it to the ground. You do not waste valuable time and resources digging massive tunnels below ground. So for me, that was if you haven't seen it, it's a huge, important concept to begin thinking about when it comes to the World Fairs. I'll get to some other things for you guys later on. I still, like I say, try to come by once a month. So I already have what I'm going to talk about next month for you guys planned. Of course, we're in the home stretch, beginning of very strange elections all over the world. And this should be so obvious now. If anybody thinks that whoever the leaders are of these countries are really running their countries, like by now, that if anyone has not understood that that's obviously false, like 100% false and always has been, there's no hope. There's no hope now. Like, if anyone thinks Joe Biden is really making decisions for the United States, and has been, and that then Donald Trump or Obama or Bush or anybody was making, Ronald Reagan was making, like, really, some former actor make major decisions about the direction of your country? It's obviously all just a front. It's all just a show. When like the leader of France realizes, hey, I'm in trouble here. I'm like, we are, my population doesn't like me. So what should I do? Let's have an election so I can make sure I get voted out. Great idea. No one thinks like that if they're actually really in charge of anything. By now, it should be obvious the incredible theater that is this reality. I mean, as I talk about, well, it's a simulation to start with. I mean, it's a completely, it doesn't have the reality you think it does, but then there's this second bizarre layer within the simulation that is also controlling bizarrely the perception and everything in it. And that's how it gets so difficult for anyone to start actually on a movement to ultimate truth, to exiting the cave, because the densest layer, this layer that was within this reality, can be so obvious to see, and there's so much to look at. I mean, we're going to talk about here, world fairs, world leaders, world whatever, and I mean, this could keep you going for years, keeping a lot of people busy for years studying this stuff. And it's just the finest layer. There's still 20 or 30 layers to go. And if you're still studying this only, if this is the only area you're looking at, if you're still looking at the material reality, which is theater on so many levels, simulation on another, it's got you, right? It's got you. It's got you because you're doing exactly what it wants you to do, and that's distracting totally into the material realm. You have to look through it. It's the most obvious layer to see. You have to see through it. You have to do the work to get to that point. But then, like everything, there comes a time where, okay, and that's why I do very little. It's not that I don't ever look at some historical stuff. I do. I get curious once in a while, every so often. But my study is just very rare because once you've seen through a layer of the lie, you don't need to keep studying the layer. The layer's obvious. Okay, move on to the next layer. And that's where I've been going, deeper and deeper and deeper, further and further back into the layers of everything. The book's almost done, but in case somebody's questioning, I'm writing the last chapter now. And plan is in the next 3 or 4 days that the last chapter will be complete. The remainder, about half of the book has been edited and is back. The other half are in the editor's hands or on their way to editors. So I'm a little late with it, but it's okay. It's been hard work. It's been given the work in the garden and everything else on top of it. I didn't have a really good, I didn't put together a really good, what's the word I'm looking for? Work plan for the book going ahead. I thought I would do it. I thought I'd be able to do it much quicker, but with the change in locations, it's just been a slower process. And the materials, I'm really happy with the material that I'm presenting in this book. Really, really pleased with what's going to be in Exit the Cave 2. But it's, like I say, it's challenging to try to put it into clear language and simple language for a wide variety of readers that will come to this book. And so I'm getting comfortable with it. The editors have done a great job in not just cleaning up language and grammar, of course, but really asking questions of, is this what you want to say? Do you want to say this differently? Do you think this should be in the book? Do you think maybe this is something else? So, we're getting close to finishing that off. And I guess that's it for today. Good luck going through July. We'll see how this month plays out. Stay sane, stay balanced, stay clear, stay focused on whatever your deepest commitment to whatever pathway you're walking. Keep walking it, stay committed to it, and we will see you guys in August with some new ideas and perhaps with a message of a new book ready. Thanks. Cheers.